Jake bent down to lift his daughter up, glanced at the old man, and said, "Old people should not overthink. It's not good for your health." Captain Henrik's old face became redder. He gave him a stare and grunted, "Hey, I am your grandfather. If you're not my grandfather, I would not care about you, right, Julianne?" Jake looked at his daughter with a softer look. Seeing the children's sportswear, he said, "Let's go. Dad will take you jogging." Jeremy and Seth were playing with the model car. Seeing that his sister was lifted up by his father, Jeremy was obviously envious. Hearing the words of Jake, his heartbeat accelerated. He was a bit nervous and expectant. The little face was reddish, and Jeremy quickly bowed his head and continued to play with the car in his hand. "Great!" Julianne was a little excited, her little face pink. She grabbed the collar of Jake with excitement and looked at Jeremy underneath. "Brother, that would take us to jog." Seth also looked up and his eyes sparkled. Jake saw that Seth looked like this and his look softened. Going forward to touch the head of Seth, he said, "Let's go." "Yeah!" Seth stood up happily and reached out to drag along Jeremy. "Jeremy, let's go jogging." Jeremy frowned and said with a look of grievance, "He didn't ask me." Jake heard the words and was dumbfounded. Pulling up his little arm and rubbing his little face, he asked, "Why are you so difficult? Who did you take after?" Captain Henrik was quietly drinking tea on the side. Hearing this, he said, "You were exactly the same way when you were a child, as if the whole world owes something to you. You know your son now. When I was a child, I was not so difficult at all. This kid must be genetically altered." The old man glanced at him and said, "The two of you are exactly the same. Without looking at your faces, you share the same temper. You are definitely related." Jeremy heard these words from the old man. His face was even more flushed, and he looked up at the tall man in front of him. His pair of clean and clear eyes were full of sparkles. Jake saw his expression and chuckled. "Of course, he is my own. This is my son." He put Julianne down and gave her little hand to Seth. "Follow me with your sister." Seth nodded and looked at Jake full of worship. Immediately, Jake's gaze fell on Jeremy's body. Jeremy took a step back unconsciously under his gaze. But then he saw Jake reaching out to him, lifting him up directly, shouting, "On the way now." Jeremy was shocked and shouted, "What are you doing? Let me go." "Carrying you." Jake carried him out the door and made him swing a little. The little guy was scared, but when he looked down, there was a wonderful feeling. Dad was carrying him. "Seth, come up with your sister." "Good." Seth took Julianne's hand and quickly ran to follow up. "Ah!" Jeremy was thrown up, couldn't help but yelp, and then he found he was already sitting on the man's shoulders. "It's so scary, so high." Jeremy looked at the ground and felt a bit scared. Feeling the big hand holding him steady, the little guy couldn't help but get excited. So high, so high. Yesterday, his sister was raised high, and now it was his turn. Really fun. Jeremy's little face was flushed out of excitement. Looking at the bottom, he was exhilarated, looking back and holding his father's head. Seth looked at them enviously, holding Julianne's hand, and both were running with their short legs. This man was just walking, and they couldn't catch up with him while running. With this awareness, Jeremy suddenly felt that this man was so powerful. He was a grown man. This man was his father, which was a great feeling. Jeremy laughed and shouted to the back, "Seth, catch up!" Feeling that the little guy was happy, Jake's lips curled as he said, "Hold on tight, I'm going to run." With that said, Jake held him with both hands and suddenly started running. He was very fast, and Jeremy felt that he was flying. He can't help but scream, "Ah! Ah!" When the wind was poured into the mouth, Jeremy heard the echo of his own voice. He couldn't help but laugh. Jake was in a better mood. Turning a corner, he ran back in the direction of the two little kids. Suddenly, Jeremy felt that his body was light, and he screamed. But then he was firmly held in a pair of strong and powerful arms. Jeremy was so scared that his eyes were wide, but But the feeling of excitement and happiness were even more memorable. So fun, so exciting. Is it fun? Jake looked down at him with a smile in his dark eyes. There seemed to be a galaxy inside his pupils. Such beautiful eyes. Jeremy looked at his eyes, his cheeks were hot, and he couldn't help but smile and nodded. It's fun. Then Dad will play with you often in the future. Dad. Jeremy nodded and excitedly raised his arm. I still want to play. Let's go. Jeremy lifted him up again, and Jeremy laughed happily. Julianne followed Seth behind them, and the little girl pouted and looked unhappy. Dad is bad. Why doesn't he lift me up? Seth was envious in the back, holding Julianne's hand and comforting her. It will be your turn in a bit. Really? Really. Uncle likes Julianne the best. Julianne was happy. She got rid of Seth's hand and ran forward with her short legs. Dad, I want to be up. Seth quickly followed up and shouted, Julianne, be careful. The old man walked out to the front yard with his cane. When he saw such a scene, he laughed happily and turned his head to Drake, who was busy. This is more like a family. Over the years, Serena has suffered too much. Drake also smiled. Right? Now that he's back, the children are happy and she's happy too. Then she looked at the clock hanging in the living room, smiled and said quietly to the old man, Is she still not up? Must be tired. When the old man heard the words of Drake, he coughed and walked inside with a cane, saying, Old people should not overthink. It's not good for your health.